Dear friend, you can grow your personal and business brand by creating a strong network through podcasting. Create real human connections, have the ability to share your story and interesting point of view. To get started, you can make use of the special offer for friends of this podcast, which is on kitcaster.com/mirror. kitcaster.com/MIRROR. The link and further instruction or details will be found in the show notes for this episode. Thank you. Don't forget to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or whatever platform you listen to this on. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to Mirror Talk Podcast. Your moment of greatness starts now. Today's guest has been featured in US News, CNN Money, and Bankrate.com. He's a leading cash flow expert for real estate investors, and he has been independent or financially independent twice by the time he was age 39. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Toby?
I'm fine, thank you so much. So I'm really excited to learn so much from you today about being, financially independent. But before we jump into the topic, I'd love you to tell us about yourself. What have you experienced in life thus far up to this moment?
Yeah. Well, I grew up on the western half of the United States in Oregon. I grew up out there, and then in my 20s, I moved out to Utah. Primarily, little known fact about me is I was actually one of the nation's top amateur ballroom dancers. And so I went out to Utah, and they had the world's best dance teams. And so we were the world championship team, and they even competed in Blackpool, England, and everything, and won the championships there. And so I came out to Utah, and then got married and had a bunch of kids. Now I'm remarried with a new wife, and we have a blended family of 8 children. So It's like the Brady Bunch in our house, but there's no room for a cleaner. We've all got all the rooms filled.
Yeah.
But yeah, I started out my path like the traditional path, right? Like I was going to college and everything. I was a sociology major with a triple minor in psychology, ballroom dancing, and Japanese, because I also lived a couple years in Japan, right? So so I kind of did a lot of everything. I was good at a lot of things, but not really a specialist, so to speak. And as I was going through that path, my whole intention was to become a business consultant, right? To help go into big corporations, tell them how they're treating their employees badly, and then walk out with a check, right? Well, I thought, well, if I'm going to do business consulting, shouldn't I have real life business experience? Not just book experience from college. So I dropped out of college with one class to go before my bachelor's, and I went the entrepreneur path. Well, that path took me down becoming like the traditional like mainstream financial advisor, where it was commission only. There was no salary or anything. It was just all off commissions. And so I started doing that, and the entrepreneur bug bit me. Like I really loved it because the whole time I really just wanted control of my time, my money, my freedom, like my own destiny. So I took the entrepreneur path because I wanted that freedom. Well, I ended up dropped out of college, never went back, never got my degree because I thought, man, with a sociology degree, that won't make me nearly as much as I can make as an entrepreneur. So I went down that path. Well, I did that for about 4 years as a financial advisor, right? Teach people to do all the traditional stuff of save everything, spend nothing, save it forever in some mutual funds and stocks and things like that. And then hopefully someday you might have something, right?
Yes.
Well, I found out like I like evidence, like I like things to prove themselves. And I found out that over the years, as I started to see people that had advisors for decades, right, and have been saving and doing everything they're supposed to be doing, pay off their debt, all the Dave Ramsey type stuff here in the United States. Dave Ramsey all about paying off debt, right? So we did that. I was teaching all that stuff, and I realized, wait a minute, people aren't really becoming financially free, or they're not getting the numbers they thought they would. And so I started to really dig deeper. But the thing is, it was hard because when your paycheck is tied to something,
Yes.
you kind of create your own narrative, right? You want the narrative to support what you're doing. And finally, it was a friend of mine who had actually trained in the business that left to go do real estate investing. And this is the end of 2005. And he said, I called him up to wish him Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Yeah. And as I did that, I said, well, how are you doing? Thinking like, okay, he's probably going broke. He needs to come back, come begging back for work with me again, right? That wasn't the case. He said, man, life is awesome. He's like, my dad and I partnered up on some real estate deals. He's now making double the income he's made as a professor. I said, wait a minute. You just started working together 4 months ago. How is he doubling his income? That sounds too good to be true, right? As many people will say. He's like, nope, we're doing it. And so we got in this debate about what's better, stocks or real estate, which obviously I lost, right? Because he stopped me. He said, Chris, what principles are you teaching your clients? Like, what real, true principles do you teach them? I'm like, well, what do you mean by principles? He's like, that's first problem. There's principles of prosperity. He's like, 2, how many of your clients are actually financially free where they don't worry about money? I thought, and I said, well, none, because even the retired ones still watch the news and worry if the market's going to go down, right? He says, well, great, good job, Chris. Way to help them not get freedom. All right. He's like, last question, Chris. How many of you guys as financial advisors are financially free, not off the commissions you're earning by selling this stuff, but actually doing the investments, taking your own advice? And I thought about it. And I said, well, maybe one guy is financially free. And I found out later he wasn't either. I mean, once he got fired from the company, he was scrambling finding work. He was just all facade, right? He looked successful, but he wasn't. He didn't really have the money coming in. He said, well, there's your problem, Chris. I said, well, tell me the answer. He's like, I'm not going to tell you the answer. I said, well, come on, please tell me the answer. You got me to admit I'm wrong. I'm open. Tell me. He's like, well, I don't believe you are open, but if you are, go get this book by Robert Kiyosaki, who's the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but get the book called Who Took My Money, which says why mutual funds are bad. There you go. That's the summary of the whole book, right? Why mutual funds won't get you free. And then the second thing you do is listen to this radio show. This is before podcast, right? So listen to this, radio show where these 2 investors talk about real estate investing and principles of wealth and prosperity. Listen to that show. And so from January through March, those 2 months, I'm eating it all up. I stopped going to all the trainings and all the stuff that the financial advisors are teaching, and I'm learning from these guys instead. Ironically, my business as a financial advisor started going up by not taking the advice, the traditional advice. But it got to the point where I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't stay in integrity and be that traditional financial advisor because, there's nothing worse than when your value system is being violated, right? Like if you've ever taken a job or you've done a business where you know that it's violating every value in your core, you can't do that, right? So we got to the point where finally, like about the end of March, I said, all right, I can't do it anymore. I can't keep teaching this stuff that I know is not true, and the whole investment, the financial advising world doesn't support doing something outside the norm. So I left. I said, I will never teach about money again. I'm done. I will just be a mortgage broker and I'll teach ballroom dancing at that local university, right? Well, flash forward, of course, a month, and I'm going crazy because I got to know what these guys know. So I started learning from them, right? And unbeknownst to me, by about July of that same year, so about 3 months or so later, I was able to get myself out of the rat race without having a lot of money in the bank account. I didn't have to have a lot of money saved up, but they were really good at teaching those principles that said, hey, how do we create passive streams or residual streams of income, whether it be in your business or even outside of your business, like doing real estate investing and that sort of thing. And, I only needed $3,500 a month to get out of the rat race back in those days. And by July, I was doing it. I was like, wow, I'm only working a couple hours a week. I was living the Tim Ferriss 4-hour work week, right? And it was accidental.
Wow.
I didn't expect it to happen, but it did. And I was only 28 years old. So I was kind of young and dumb, right? Just, thinking I knew everything. But, after I got successful, then my pride came in. And that's why about a year and a half or so later, the recession hits and then I'm back in the rat race again, and I had to dig myself back out. In 2016, I was able to dig out of $1 million debt hole. I went from basically a millionaire to an upside down millionaire, right? Where I was over $1 million in debt and I had to dig out of it. I didn't file for bankruptcy, but I did have to white knuckle everything, and try to get over my mind and all the feelings of failure and discouragement and all that stuff to eventually, about 7 years later, 7 to 8 years later, I guess it was that whole process of getting back on top to where I could say, now I'm financially independent at 39 as of 2016. I'm 43 now. And I'm like, okay, I've done it. Good. Like that. I'm much wiser and smarter this time around. And so I'm basically semi-retired now. I'm teaching people how to get out of the rat race, teach people how to become financially free where they work because they want to, not because they have to. Like it's so empowering when you know that you work, by choice rather than needing the paycheck. It's such an empowering thing. And the ironic thing is the less you need money, the more money that tends to come in. It's this weird principle of the universe that happens, like that abundance mindset, right? And that abundance state of being where, you know, when you create more wants to come. It's like creating babies, you know? So, which unfortunately I know too much about. Very fortunately, I'm very blessed to have so many kids, but you know, I know how to make kids, and I've eventually figured out how to make money too.
I find that really awesome because while preparing for this conversation, I was watching a video, and it was saying like, you don't, it's either two things: either you chase money or money chases you, and then you have to choose which one you want. Do you want to be chasing the money, or you want the money to chase you? And you made mention of that right now, that you don't want to chase the money, but you want the money to chase you. Like, you want to make the money, basically.
Especially if you're a business owner. Like if you're in business or you're trying to start a side hustle or something to get yourself free, the worst thing you can do is be desperate, right? The worst thing you do is be in a place where you're financially broke. And trust me, I've been there. Like, you know, when I was over $1 million in debt, what eventually got me to be over $1 million in debt is you know, what happened is I came out of retirement to launch a new business with a partner, right? So expenses increased because we were starting a new business. I just bought a new house before then. So some of my personal expenses increased. And at the same time, like all those expenses are going up, but the income was dropping because one of the partners said, hey, you know what? I want you to focus here with us. You know, don't go do these multiple streams of income, which, by the way, that's what we're telling people to do, to be in integrity, right? He says, cut off those multiple streams of income and just focus with us. Bad mistake. You know, I should have never cut off those multiple streams of income, because then I only had one stream of income coming in. And of course, if our business wasn't profitable, then we're paying money out of pocket versus getting paid money, right? We're in the hole. So that's where I ended up being in the hole about, you know, I was making maybe $6,000 a month, but my expenses between my personal and my business were $22,000 a month. So I was in the hole $16,000 every month. You know, that was short. Talk about a head trip, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Because at first I thought there's always a solution. And then eventually got to the point of, is there a solution? Like, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this mess, right? I mean, I did to some level. I knew there was faith I would get out of it, but I knew it was tough, right? And I'll tell you, the hardest time to make money is when you have to make money. You know, when you have to make money, you send off this energy out to everybody, right? And they don't know it. Most people are very unaware of how things affect them. But when you send out an energy of desperation, like, I need this business, I need this customer, I need this client. When you have that desperation within you, they feel it. And they'll say like, yeah, I just don't feel right about it. I don't know why. I just don't feel right. It doesn't feel right to me. No, I'm not going to do business with you, right? Or I'm not going to buy your product. And it has nothing to do with what's wrong with the product or the business, right? It's all about the energy you're sending off.
How are you able to, need money, but not send out that vibe or send out that energy that you are desperate to make money?
You can do a few things. It depends on your current circumstance, right? So if you're doing a business as a side hustle, you know, I recommend don't quit your job. Like, keep it as a side hustle. And I get it, because when I was a financial advisor, it was a side hustle for a time until I went full time into it. And this was I remember I went full time in 2004. It was right after my first child was born, right? And I was so excited. I'm like, I'm living the dream. Yes, I'm free from my job. And then the pressure, the scarcity crept in, and I all of a sudden I couldn't make money because I was all the pressure was on me. I was like, I have to pay my mortgage now. I don't have a job to fall on. I have to make money. It's all on me. I can't just punch it. It's not about punching a clock. It's not time for money. It's trying to get more clients, right? And so I froze up, and that desperation was bad. What I learned eventually, right, is if you're in that place, one is don't quit your job. If you got a day job and this is a side hustle, keep it going, because during those times when I was learning to do it, I actually made more money. And in fact, I tracked all my numbers. My business made more money when I had a job with less time in my business than when I had full time in my business, but I didn't have that side job. Because when that pressure, when that scarcity creeps in, you just become counterproductive. You get kind of dumb, you get stupid. So if you have a job, or you have the opportunity to have a job or some stable income, do it. Now, if you're like me, eventually, where you pretty much become unemployable because you were a business owner for too long, right? I couldn't even get a job as a paper route during the last recession. Like that's how sad it was. Like, they wouldn't even contact me back for the paper route. I applied for it, at 4 a.m. that I could try to do before I went to my work, right? Just to try to make some steady income. Well, And that place, you have to realize that you have to stay present in the very second, in the moment, right? Because most of those fears you create in your mind, they're created from your imagination, right? They're created of what's that possible future, that possible outcome. Now, if you have a positive outlook, if you're like, I can see it, it's awesome, it's great. Well, then, when your mind goes there, you can stay in a pretty positive mood. But if all of a sudden you're in panic and worry and doubt, and you think, oof, well, what if I can't make this work? What's going to happen? Those are all future scenarios that aren't reality right now. They're just scenarios playing out in your mind, but your mind will make them reality, right? Just a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the best thing to do is stay in the present moment. So the first thing I would do when I woke up is I would do, kind of like what Tony Robbins would call the hour of power, right? I would focus on mind, body, spirit. I'd focus on those three things, right? So I would focus on first thing in the morning, getting out and running or working out, weightlifting or whatever it might be, something to get my blood pumping. It could just be a nice brisk walk in the morning, something just to get your body and your body moving. Now, while I do those exercises, or at the end of those exercises, I would do like a prayer of gratitude. So I'd pray and just essentially count my blessings, like all the things that are good going on in my life, right? Sometimes I would do meditation too. I even do like breathing exercises. There's a lot of times where I'd have to breathe and just be like, okay, calm down. You're about to go into the workday. It's okay. In this moment, things are perfect. And that's the thing, is that I realized in that very second, even while I'm running, I'm out there working out, I'm not spending any money. I didn't have to have money to go, educate myself, like read good books or listen to good podcasts. I mean, it's easier now than it was back then when I was struggling. Now we have YouTube, we've got everything. We have so much free information. You can learn on $0 out of pocket. You can exercise on $0 out of pocket. You can pray, you can meditate, you can read scriptures, or things like that. Like you can do all kinds of things for essentially no money out of pocket. And I realized that in those moments that right then, I don't need money, right? I'm not broke. I wasn't broke in those moments. Now, if I start thinking about the bills I had to pay, even if that bill was overdue, still in that moment, I wasn't going to die. I was still going to live. And so there was hope. And so I focused on that. It's like, right now I have all of my needs met. I have everything I need. Even if I didn't know where the next paycheck was coming from, even if I didn't know how I was even going to feed my family. And by the way, there was moments where I was on welfare, like I had to go on welfare and be the guy that's supposed to be teach people how to get out of the rat race, right? And teach people how to be financially free. And I'm on welfare at certain moments there, I mean, that stuff was, you can imagine that's mentally debilitating because, it's even worse when you're the guy who's supposed to be teaching it. It's another thing when it's not part of your profession, right? But I knew that was something that was temporary, and that's the thing I had to keep telling myself is temporary, that in this moment, I'm not broke. Another thing I thought about was that there are no accidents. Everything happens for a reason, right? And that was big for me because I had to realize, I remember thinking back then, while I was out on some of those runs, doing my little power hour, right? I remember thinking, I don't know why I'm going through this, but if only one person gets helped from my experience, if one person gets hope, would that be worth it? And I was like, yeah, that would be worth it if I could just give one person hope. I didn't know how big that would be. I mean, even though I don't just teach people like how to stay from being broke, right? I teach people now how to, become financially free. But I mean, there's been hundreds of thousands of people that have heard this story that I hope have been inspired that maybe did something different, right? And that's really the thing that I think is amazing is that I knew that, God was putting me in that circumstance. Even if I put myself there, he was taking advantage of it to where I could use that to bless more lives, and that's where I knew that I was going to get out of it. I didn't know how, but I knew I would. Even when I had collection calls coming, because of course, when you're in debt so much, you're not paying any bills, right? You're upside down. You can't pay a lot of the bills. I even lost my home. I had a nice home and everything. It was like my dream home. I lost that in a foreclosure in 2009, right? Because the bank was through Lehman Brothers. They wouldn't accept any short sale offers. So somebody bought it at the courthouse for less than half the price of what it was worth. So they bought it. I wish I would have bought it at the price they bought it at because it was amazing. And so like he knocked on my door, says, "Hey, I just bought your house in cash. When can you get out?" And we were just about to have our fourth child. Like we were just a week away. So I paid him $2,000 to stay in the house. I got every dollar I had just to pay him to keep him at bay while we try to find a new place. And that was, and have a baby, you know,
Yes.
it was stressful, but again, I kept hanging on to, okay, there's a reason I'm going through this. There's hope. Like it's not going to be this bad. It's going to get better. And hold on to that hope, even though it was that period of time, and that recession time was about 1.5 years for me, and almost 2 years, but from the time I started stressing to the time where I started to say, now I'm finally seeing the fruit of my patience, right? It was about 2 years.
2 years.
Now I'll tell you, I didn't have to take that long, but that's what it was for me. Because I went through a little mini experience like that when I went through a divorce back in 2015. You know, when I went through that emotionally, that was a harder time than being over $1 million in debt. Because, you know, your whole life is being rocked.
Yes.
But remember, I knew that things that I learned, I already overcame before. So that faith was there, but I learned one thing from the first time. And this is key.
What did you learn?
Because when you're suffering in scarcity, it's so tempting to just kind of clam up, right? Just kind of go inward. You want to suffer silently. You know, you don't want to bring other people into your problems. You don't want to feel like you're a downer, right? You don't want to feel like you're somebody who's, just oozing scarcity all over people. And so I would just, hold it to myself. I would just suffer silently. There's people that worked in my company that didn't even know all the struggles I was going through. I remember one guy, when I finally told him what happened, he started crying. He's like, I can't believe you're going through this right now. And he was going through his own mess, but I just was quiet about it. I didn't reach out for help. I'll tell you, the best thing I learned is to reach out to people. Like, it doesn't mean you ask for handouts and ask for money. I'm not saying that, but reach out and just tell them like, hey, this is what I'm going through right now. Like, there's something so nice especially when you have that core center of influence of friends that are just, they can be there. They can be your strong support. It's amazing. Now, you don't want the friends that are going to be the ones say, well, just give up. You don't want those friends, right? You want the ones that say, man, I know it's tough. It sucks. You're going to figure it out. Right. And hey, can I create value? Is there a way I can create value for you? Right. Like, and that's the thing I learned too, is that it was not just reaching out to people, but it's also constantly stop worrying about yourself and focus on the one key principle that got me out of the rat race the first time and the second time. And it wasn't just a strategy, it was a mindset. And the mindset was, how can I create more value for more people?
And I think I've just been blown away from your story, your success story, thus far. Like you losing everything, being in like over $1 million in debt, and finding your way back, going through divorce, losing your house at a point. That really, yes. And now you're back, as you're financially independent once again, making success with your business. And earlier you make mention of you go through everything in life for a reason. And yes, and I believe, as you said also, that your reason for going through everything you've gone through is to help other people on their own journey in life. And I believe that's also why you have this your company called Money Ripples, where you expose the popular myths around money, if I'm right. And I've been amazed by your content on YouTube, and also your podcast, the Money Ripple Show, where you have over 400 episodes talking about different aspects of making passive source of income for yourself. So can you tell us about this, your company, the Money Ripples, and about your podcast and your YouTube channel?
Yeah. So my YouTube channel and my podcast are kind of tied together, right? I have the Money Ripples with Chris Miles channel, and I even have Chris Miles Money Ripples too. But that's usually, I have different topics on that one. But my podcast really is focused around getting people out of the rat race, which is what Money Ripples is about. It's really teaching people how to get out of the rat race. Like it's saying, hey, I've got money, I've got potential, I've got stuff here, but my money's not working for me. I'm working for money, but my money's not working for me where the money's starting to pay me back, right? Because I'll run into people all the time that sometimes they're worth millions of dollars, but they're asset rich and cash poor. Like, they've got assets, they've got savings, they've got, and their investments they've done, but it's not paying them any income. So they feel stuck, they feel trapped, right? They don't feel like they could ever stop working because the money's not really working for them. It's just, they're hoping it grows, but most of the time they're gambling in the stock markets, which is not a great place to keep your money. It's not a place to ever get freedom, because you can never have freedom where there's uncertainty, right? You need predictable, stable cash flow coming in each and every month on a regular basis that you can count on, right? That's what you need. And that can be from your investments, that can be from your business as well. And like it can come from those different places, but it's got to be a place where you don't have to keep struggling and working and pumping out all that energy and hours, for hopes of $1, right?
Yes.
It's got to be something more. And so that's usually what I teach now. I do part-time consulting where people come to me and say, Chris, here's my financial situation. How do I get it to start paying me so I can hit my goal of, $5,000, $10,000, $30,000 a month, whatever it is, right? That they want passively coming in.
Yes.
So then they can say, now I can choose to do whatever I want, and that's the kind of thing we create a game plan to get you there. I even teach people about, things with like using a specific strategy about how to get your money to pay you twice, like your investment money or your business money, to get it paying you twice, where it's earning money over here and it's earning money in the investment or your business over here too. So you're getting paid 2 times.
Can you teach me about that a little bit? That sounds very interesting. How can I make my money pay me twice?
Yeah. It's pretty cool. Like, I actually use the vehicle I use, like the tool I use, right, is just actually a life insurance policy. It's a whole life insurance policy, which is ironic considering that those first 4 years as a financial advisor, I told people never, ever, ever buy a whole life policy, right? But the thing I learned in the mid 2000s from guys that were in real estate and doing stuff is that they were using these policies to make more money. I was like, why are these brilliant guys making money in real estate use these policies, right? Well, I found out that, of course, that, I knew you could build cash inside of them, right? So whole life insurance is different than term insurance. Term insurance is just death insurance, right? It only pays out when you die. You pay a premium, it pays out. It's like car insurance, right? But whole life is different because you get that death benefit, but you also have this living benefit of cash that grows in there tax-free, especially in the United States. Other countries like I know Australia, it's not as good there. Canada has some, okay things with it as well. They have some options as well. But for the most part, US has got like kind of the better options with that. So here in the US, especially, we can let it grow tax-free, come out tax-free. But here's the cool thing is that the money that's sitting in there in the cash, even though it's getting a guaranteed return of at least 4% or so, right?
Yes.
What's awesome is that you can actually borrow from the insurance company or from a bank. There's private banks that will even lend you money based on that money sitting there because they know that money's in there, guaranteed it's always going to grow. They'll give you a loan, sometimes up to 95, sometimes even up to 100% of the money sitting in there. So when they give you a loan, say it like, I have a bank to just approve me to get a loan at 3.25%. Well, if my money is earning inside of there at 5.75%, like it is right now, right? Well, here's the cool thing is that although I take the money out 3.25, I'm borrowing from the bank or the insurance company, right? They're paying me out of their pocket. My money's still all in there growing and compounding tax-free. So it's making compounded 5.75 or whatever interest that's earning, right? Depending on the company, while I'm only paying 3.25. And if I use that and buy a real estate property with that or something else, even if I make 10 to 12% on my real estate property, that's adding, when you start factoring the compound and the interest that you're paying on the loan and stuff, the compound interest goes like this, while the interest on the loan goes like this. I make another 3, 4, 5% a year on my money on top of like the 10 or 12% I'm making on my real estate.
Yes.
So I'm essentially using the same money to make me money twice. Right. It's really, really a fun strategy.
Wow. And other, passive source of income that you actually, you're an expert in is, real estate also.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about how can I make passive income from real estate? What am I supposed to do with real estate to ensure that I make, passive income from it?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of ways to do it in the real estate game. Like most people think you just have to buy a property and then rent it out. Right. And that's a great strategy. I do that as well. But I don't manage my properties. So when I buy a property, and I buy a property not near me, I buy it all the way across on the other side of the country. So most of my properties are over 2,000 miles away from me. I've never even seen them with my own eyes. Wow. I know they're there. Yeah, I know they exist. Photos and video proof and everything that they exist, right? And there's renters in them. Yes. But I don't even know the renters' names, really. Like they just tell me, hey, we got a renter for you. But they screen the renters. They deal with any issues, right? If there's anything that has to come out of pocket, like if there's repairs, great, they help with those repairs. But when I buy a property, they're already rent ready. So it's already repaired, it's ready to go. So I can start making money right from day one. Yes. So, I mean, I just closed on a couple properties in Alabama. It cost me about $80,000 out of pocket, but I'm cash flowing roughly about $900 a month from that. So I'm making like a 13-14% rate of return on my money, right? That's creating income for me.
Yes.
So think about that. Most people, like if they happen to be lucky enough to save $1 million in the stock market, if you go on the basic traditional financial advice, you should only pull out maybe 2 or 3% a year. So let's say we take that 3%. That means you're only living on $30,000 a year from $1 million. You're like a broke millionaire, right?
Yes.
But I can take $1 million and make at least $100,000 to $120,000 a year just buying real estate, and I don't have to manage it. Like I just have to buy it. I let them deal with all the headaches, right? I let the property managers do all the work for me. That's the money I get after I pay them, So it's a different level of saying, do I want 30,000 a year or do I want 100,000 or more a year? Which one's better? It's not hard. And not to mention there's usually in the US, especially, there's not as much taxes. In fact, you might not pay any taxes on that money, which is amazing. So that's one way. Now you don't have to go buy properties. There's even different people that say, hey, let's pool our money together and buy an apartment complex. You can pool your money together there. You don't do anything you just throw money at it basically, right? You pull the money in, but they pay you a return off of it. There's different funds. Like I know there's funds I've advertised on my radio show that pay like 10 or 11% a year, and they pay you monthly. So it's like steady income. So if you put in, even just $12,000, you're making at least $100 a month, so there's all kinds of ways to do it that's so much better than what the stock market has to offer. And people just don't realize that because there's not a people really being paid out there like the financial advising world, where there's billions and billions of dollars being thrust at you in marketing and advertising to tell you to buy stocks or buy mutual funds, which by the way, are high risk and mediocre returns, where I can do things with real estate where it's lower risk, higher returns, right? It's safer and I make more predictable cash flow and money. And when I realized that after, in 2006, after I was about to leave being a financial advisor, it blew up my mind. I never realized it was so easy to become financially free. It doesn't mean it's overnight. It's not get rich quick, right? But it was so much of a quicker path than what I was telling people, which, especially when I was trying to run real numbers, it was depressing. It was like, okay, people, you're going to save all this money and you're going to live on less than what you did while you're working. You're going to live on a very tight budget, and then you'll be free. That's not the case here. You can actually have as much freedom as you want, depending on your situation.
Yes. But how do you prepare yourself, mentally or personally for this kind of, business or this kind of, passive source of income adventure? Like, what am I meant to do to myself, or what is the listener out there supposed to do? Am I supposed to read some books? What am I supposed to pay notes to personally in order to be strong enough to get into the real estate business?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is you do have to kind of educate yourself a little bit, because the biggest objection for people, or the biggest challenge for people, is just like I said to my friend, right? That sounds too good to be true,
Yeah.
You have to get over that because it's happening all the time. I mean, and look, and I like evidence, right? Look at the richest people in the world. They're business owners, right? They own big corporations. They're investors, but now they're not investing in the stock market. There are so few people that actually buy Warren Buffett is a good example. He doesn't invest in the stock market. He buys companies, right? He's a business owner that buys interest in companies. He's not the traditional mutual fund investor. He doesn't believe in that stuff. So you don't find people in the stock markets in the Fortune 500, the richest people in the world lists, right? But you do find real estate developers and investors. You do find business owners. That's been proven. And there's millions of people that have done it before you even maybe thought it was possible, right? So if so many people have done it, and then so few people have done it in the stock market, why do we keep going to that stuff? Which just because every other broke person does it too. A great book to read is Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? A great book to kind of break into that. Another great book is by one of my former partners, Garrett Gunderson, Killing Sacred Cows is another good financial book to read. That one doesn't go so much into the investing world, but it more opens your mind about other financial things, more basic financial things, right?
Yes.
But I'll tell you, Rich Dad Poor Dad is a great one to start with. The only problem is most of those guys are the gurus, don't have the way to actually create the answer. They don't have the answer to help you actually do it. So once you've started to study it and believe it, that's why I have my podcast, the Chris Miles Money Show, to teach that kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
And even then it's like, okay, well, how do I apply it? Well, that's where you might need some additional guidance or help to do that.
And I think you also have some products. I was checking on your website on moneyreports.com. I found like some products, some books and CDs that one can also use, right? Are those also helpful for this?
Yeah, that's great. Especially if you're like, okay, Chris, I don't have like $100,000 lying around, right? I don't have $100,000 or more lying around. I'm either I'm starting a new business or I'm in business. I'm trying to get cash flow up, or I'm trying to find money.
Yes.
Great resources there for helping you find cash. In fact, some of those books and those audios there, those were the main key things that I learned financially that got me out of the rat race again, right? That, that helped me find more money. And even my average client found $34,000 a year, applying those same things too. So it wasn't just me. I mean, obviously I'm my own best testimonial for myself, but there's been hundreds of other people that took those common strategies that allowed them to find more cash so they could have more money and then accelerate and start, building their wealth faster.
Yes. So is there something else I'm supposed to like pay notes to? Like, for example, I understood that you lost properties by going too big from preparing for this conversation. Are there things like that I'm also supposed to pay notes to? How did you lost, properties by going too big? And are there other, errors that, you have experienced that someone out there or myself should avoid?
Yeah. The big one that was for me is, like I said, I was 28 and just kind of overconfident. I thought that just because I got out of the rat race so quickly that, everything I touched would turn to gold, right? So the big thing is pride. Don't ever get prideful. Don't ever think that you could not lose, right? That's a big one. The other thing is that I fixed this time around that I didn't do the first time is, I started right. I started by focusing on cash flow, right? How do I get residual or passive streams of income coming in? So the first part I did was right. But after I got there, I thought, well, wait, how can I make this bigger? How can I do it faster, right? Yes. So I got impatient, right? And so like, for example, when I bought a real estate property before the last recession, when I would buy it, I would focus not on creating cash flow. I would focus on how can I make as much money based on appreciation, on the market growing, right? So like, for example, I would think, well, if I buy a $100,000 home and the market appreciates 10%, I make 10,000. But if I buy a $500,000 home and it makes 10%, I make 50,000.
Yes.
So, hey, I'm going to mortgage that as much as I can. I'm going to buy that property and I hope that it goes up. Now, it doesn't pay me anything, or it pays me very little, that my mortgage payment's still higher than the rent I'm getting. So it's not making any money, right? So that was the big mistake I did, is that I was almost essentially financing it. I love mortgages, by the way. I love using them, but the rent, the money that's coming in, the revenue that coming in from those real estate properties, it has to be higher than whatever it costs you, right? Just like in business, you need profit. You wouldn't go into business, say, yeah, it's such a great year, I lost $25,000. You don't say that in business, right?
No.
If you look at real estate the same way, which is I want profit, I want as much cash flow as I possibly can get out of this thing, which is what I do now, right? Even if it's $300 a month for a property. Now that doesn't sound amazing, right? That doesn't sound as cool as $50,000. No. But I tell people all the time, boring is sexy, right? I love the things that are just consistent and it keeps paying me all the time. That is way sexier than me just trying to gamble my way to wealth. And that's what I did wrong in the last recession.
Oh, but some people say, it's good to take risk. It's good to, pour it all in, go out or go home or something like that. What do you think about that?
No way. No, high risk does not create high returns. That's a myth out there, right? They teach you that in the financial advising world is, hey, well, high risk creates high returns. Well, when I started to realize that wasn't true is, the definition of risk is chance of loss, right? What's your odds of losing? Well, if my chance of losing is 90%, that does not mean I have a 90% chance of winning, right? That the math doesn't add up. You only have 100%. So if you have a 90% chance of losing, you only have a 10% chance of winning. Yes. So real investors, just like the Buffetts of the world, right? Just like those that are actually doing this and creating wealth, they don't want high risk. They know that that's a farce. That's something that the financial companies teach you to do. So you take all the risk while they take none of it. They want you gambling in the markets while they take their guaranteed fees from you every single year, right? Yes. That's how they work. So that's why that's where that myth came from. So when you take risks, you take calculated risks that you can minimize the risk as low as you possibly can, so that you can get almost a guaranteed success, right? Nothing's guaranteed 100%, but if you can mitigate that risk so low that you're like, nope, I can make sure that even if these bad things happen, I can still turn this around. I can still make this work.
Yes.
That is how you create real wealth. And that's how you create really freedom, financial freedom. You can become financially independent and be financially in bondage, right?
Yes.
Financial freedom is up here and here in your heart too, right? It's something where you just have that confidence and you feel safe. But if you're trying to do it gambling, you're going to have this thing in the back of your head saying, yeah, but what if it doesn't work out? Oh, better hope for that best case scenario, because if it does, I'm okay. But if it doesn't, I'm broke, right? You're not financially free no matter how much you make until you know with certainty, you're like, nope, I've got my risk as low as possible and I can maximize my gains as a result.
Yes. But I think I still want to tap from that question or from that answer you said already, because from your experience, from, being financially independent, getting into debt and coming back, what advice will you give me and what advice will you give the listeners out there to ensure that we are financially independent all the time, or we gain that financial freedom? Yes.
Yeah. Listen to those that have been there, done that, and most importantly, still doing it today, right? Because it's one thing when someone says, hey, I became financially free in 1993, right? But maybe they aren't today. You don't want to listen to that advice. That's advice that didn't work, right? It's like, people that say like, yeah, I made lots of money in the .com bust, before the .com bust, but then I went broke. You don't want those people. You want people that are actually financially free. That's why if you listen to advisors, people that are financial advisors, ask them flat out, just say, hey, are you financially free off your own investments? Could you stop your business right now and live off your investments? And if that's not the case, right? If they can't live off what they preach, you don't want to follow that advice either. It's the blind leading the blind. So find those people that are actually doing it now, doing it today, and have done it before, right? And those are the people you want to listen to. Follow them, follow their advice, get their voices in your head, and then try to apply what they teach.
Yes, and I think you're one of those people, right? So how can we get across to you? How can we, get connected to you to get more wisdom or gain more advice from you, for example?
Yeah, well, you already mentioned it. I mean, moneyripples.com is my website. You can always go there. We even post some of our podcast videos on there too, on the blog page. And you can even, again, follow my podcast, The Chris Miles Money Show. It's on iTunes or any other podcast app that you listen to.
Yes, that's awesome. Yeah. So I will encourage everyone who is listening to check out everything about Chris from his website. I'll place everything in the show notes for this episode. Then you could just get across to him, watch his YouTube videos, or listen to the podcast at your leisure time. They are filled with a lot of information and a lot of things that ensures one to get or gain financial freedom. So is there something else we've not talked about that you would love to still talk about before we end this episode?
I mean, there's so many things that I teach, but I'll end with this message, right? Is some of the best advice I've ever taken is not popular. Right? It's not the advice you hear commonly.
Yes.
I like to be against the grain. Even like in business, I learned that the whole hustle mentality, they say you got to get there and hustle, work 120-hour weeks. It doesn't work. I can promise you that. I made way more money when I went down to 5 to 10 hours a week, focusing on what was the most productive than I did working 50 or 60 hours a week, right? Working, 5, 10 times more. I made more money and I had more profit by working less, right? Yes. So I actually believe things like, you got to hustle. I believe that's a myth. I do believe you need to work. You still have to create value for people. That's a key, right? Yes. But you can do productive, smart work where you don't have to be working overtime hours. That's a big key. And I'll tell you, a great book to help me see that was a book by Mike Michalowicz. The book is called The Pumpkin Plan. That totally changed my perspective on my business. I seriously cut my hours down by like 3-4 times, but my profits went up like 5 times. Wow. So it freed me up completely. So that kind of stuff is a big key. But again, I'll just tell you, like, don't follow the masses, right? Don't follow the mass of people, because the masses of people are unsuccessful. They're broke. They're not free. They're still struggling and surviving. Don't follow what most people say. Do the opposite, because in many cases, the opposite is actually the right answer. So do that, and just know that there's hope. No matter how far gone you think you are. Hey, I can guarantee in your story, you probably weren't any worse off financially than I've ever been, right? So think of that as a good place to start from. That's a better launching pad than where I was. If I can make it, there's no doubt that you can do it as well.
Wow, that's awesome. That's a wonderful closing word. Thank you so much, Chris, for your time. I really appreciate everything I've been to learn from you. I've been to learn about financial freedom, having real estate as a passive source of income, and also, most importantly, what I'm going to also work on is having this power hour every morning where you either work out, or and you also have this prayer of gratitude, and you prepare yourself for the day. All of these things, contributes to one's development and also on one's way to financial freedom. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Really appreciate being here.
Wow, you made it to the very end of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'm grateful for your time, your love, and your contributions. Subscribe, like, review, and share this podcast. God bless you. Bye.